Welcome everybody to this session of our EpiDoc training program. And in this session, Gabriel Bodard of the University of London is going to talk about how to express different levels of certainty and precision in EpiDoc. So please, Gabby, go ahead.
Thank you, Irene. So what I'm going to talk about is these various different ways in which EpiDoc recommends you use the TEI elements and attributes to express uncertainty or imprecision of statements that you're making. TEI has a whole richness, a whole complexity of ways in which you can express uncertainty, and you can express how uncertain you are and why you're uncertain and what the other possibilities are and how likely these various possibilities are relative to one another, all of which is far more than we would ever need to say. I think 95% of the time when we're expressing uncertainty, we just want to say question mark. A slight flag, I'm not sure about this. I'm making this statement, but I want you to know that it's a little bit uncertain. All this other sort of very complex kind of uncertainty is very rarely what epigraphers are able to say. If an epigrapher says this supplement is uncertain, there's no point is that epigrapher going to say it's actually only 44% certain. Right? I mean, that sort of thing is just meaningless. So we really, in almost all cases, we want to use a much simpler kind of reference to uncertainty or imprecision than is technically possible. So it's actually a lot simpler than it might be. I'll talk a little bit about a couple of the slightly more complex versions at the end, but mostly we'll try and keep it relatively simple. So I want to talk about three categories of uncertainty that might come up in EpiDoc files. The first is the simplest and the most common, which is expressing uncertainty or incompleteness of supplied comment. And by supplied, I want to include emended, restored, expanded, resolved content, but content which is not on the stone or on the papyrus page, but that has been added to the text by the editor because the editor believes that it either was there or would be understood to be there or was intended to be there. And so that can be flagged as uncertain, and that can only mean one thing, that I'm supplying this, but I'm not sure I've got the content right. The second kind is imprecision of numerical values, and that's fairly straightforward. Any time you give a numerical value, you might want to say actually it's around that value rather than being exactly that value. Okay, and finally, this is I'll give just one or two examples of the slightly more complex version where you want to give uncertainty about editorial decisions, where you want to say something a little bit more complex than just I've given you some text and I'm not sure that the text I've given you is actually what it should be, but it's by way of example. So the first example, the simple example, you will see something like this very often in an inscription or a papyrus edition. And this is simply telling you that the editor believes the second word is curator, but rather than being 100% certain or 90% certain as most as we can ever be, they want to say, look, it might be curator, that's quite likely, but just so you know, I'm not sure. And that's what the question mark there means in the Leiden version, and in the XML version we tag the restored text as supplied reason lost as usual, but we add this cert attribute, the certainty attribute, with a value of low, and that's the only value we use. We don't want to say ever certainty low, certainty medium, certainty very low, or whatever. We just have low. It's either we're not mentioning the certainty or we're saying the certainty is low. Okay, those are the only two possibilities in EpiDoc. You don't flag certainty, or you say cert equals low. Likewise, if we expand or resolve an abbreviation, if we have PR on a papyrus, and normally we would expand that to presbyter, but it might in this case be something else, and you just want to say it's probably presbyter, but not 100% sure. Again, you have the question mark. Again, the X element, which is the element that contains the expanded or resolved text, that gets the attribute cert equals low. Okay, it's not the expand attribute, because that would be saying I'm not sure if this is an abbreviation at all. It's not the aber attribute, which would be saying I'm not sure that this that the text on the stone is correct. It's only the text that has been entirely supplied by the editor, which gets the cert attribute. And again, the only possible value there is low. You either don't say it or you say cert equals low. A slightly different example, and this is where the editor might be uncertain, but not in the sense of wanting to say this might be Marcus, but I'm not sure. It's rather it's saying this is the name Marcus, but from the context I can't tell you what case it's in. So it could be, you know, Marcus, Markham, Marquis, whatever. We can't say yet. So in this case, we do something slightly different. We would expand the abbreviation as usual with the letter that's on the stone in the aber element, and the text that we've restored, that we've expanded, in the X element. But rather than that hyphen in there, which we don't want, because that's part of the Leiden markup, the human readable markup, which we want to replace with machine readable markup here. Instead, we say that this entire word is only the initial part of the word, right? We've only given you the first part of the word. It's incomplete, and the ending you have to assume. Okay, you have to think of all the possible endings it could be, and they're all equally possible. So just to deconstruct that attribute we've given you there, part equals I. Part means this is not complete, and the value of part is which part of the word have we given you. Have we given the initial part? In other words, the ending is missing. The final part would be F, meaning that the beginning is missing, or very rarely in EpiDoc, I would have thought, but you could say it's the medial part, meaning both the beginning and end of this word are missing. I suppose there could be a word with a prefix, and therefore there could be multiple prefixes, and we leave them off. So that's an incomplete restoration. That's a little bit more complex because this involves adding an element that we wouldn't normally have around this word, this W element. Rather than tagging something on the X element that expands the abbreviation there. Okay, so the second category, which is imprecise quantities, numerical quantities, we could see any of these sorts of values in the text. So we have a gap of circa 20 characters. We have a gap of unknown characters. We have a gap of between 12 and 14 characters. Okay, these are all different ways of saying we're being imprecise about how large the gap in our text is, how large this lacuna, how many characters would have previously filled this lacuna that we're leaving blank here. And all of the things that we can do here, we can do in similar ways, but I won't illustrate them in other parts of the edition, such as when flag tagging a vacat space, when indicating dimensions, other kinds of numerical information that might occur, dates, etc. in the edition. But sticking to the text itself at the moment, look at these three examples from lacuna. So the first example, we know, I think, or you can quickly look up on your quick reference sheets how to say this is a lacuna of 20 characters. To that, you simply add the precision element saying low, and precision low means circa. Okay, so gap reason lost quantity 20 unit character means this is a gap of 20 characters. If I add precision low, this is a gap of about 20 characters. Okay, and again, that's the only, as with cert, that's the only value of precision that we really use for this sort of content. We either don't say anything about the precision, in which case it has the usual precision, which is, you know, pretty good, or it's precision low, meaning I want to say circa because I want to flag it for you. In the next example, we're not saying it's a low precision. We're saying, well, it's such low precision that we're not going to attempt to give you the value at all. If you really push at the editor, then they will say, well, obviously I know it's not a gap of just 1 or 2 characters, and obviously I know it's not a gap of 6,000 characters, but somewhere in between, you know, you can give a range, but there's no really rational reason to give such a range, so they're not going to give a range at all. And that's the case. That's you've seen this already on your quick reference and in the guidelines. This simply says gap reason lost, extent unknown. unit character. So it's an unknown number of characters. And note that just because the extent unknown doesn't mean you can't give a unit. Some people have in the past thought it was unintuitive to say that it's an unknown number of characters as opposed to an unknown number of something else. But clearly an unknown number of characters missing is different from an unknown number of lines missing or an unknown number of pages missing in a manuscript. So I think it is essential that you say what sort of how many of what are you missing here. And the final example, this is not so different from the circa example in principle. One editor might say circa 13, another editor might say 12 to 14, depending on how clear they want to be about that. We don't really know what circa 20 means. Does it mean 15 to 25? Does it mean 19 to 21? It's a bit unsure. So in the case where you want to be able to say it's definitely at least 12, but it's definitely not more than 14, you can, instead of the quantity attribute, you can use the at least and at most attributes. And here you can flag at least 12, but most 14 in this way. So those are the three main ways of indicating imprecise quantities of, in this case, lost characters. But you can see how you'd apply these attributes to a few other kinds of numerical values that you can give. The final example I want to give then is where the editor is expressing another kind of uncertainty about something that they are encoding. So not that they've said 20, but they're not sure if it's 20, but rather they've said something and they're not sure if what they've said is right at all. So we might see this. This is something taken straight from the Leiden conventions. We have something that would normally mean either line lost or multiple lines lost at the beginning or end of a text, depending on the convention. But with a question mark in there, it means lines lost, maybe. And so the simplest way to encode this, we can't just say cert equals low on the gap element, because that could mean various different things, and we want to be a little bit more specific about what we mean. Is it the certainty of the extent of the gap, the certainty of the type of the gap, the certainty of the unit of the gap, or the certainty that it's a gap at all? That would be ambiguous. So instead we use, we mark the gap as usual, bearing in mind that gap is an empty element, so it has that slash at the end of the tag, and we simply say there's a gap reason lost, quantity 1 unit line. Okay, so one line is lost here. But we want to add, and to do this, we have to open up that empty element and put some content inside it. We have to say that we're going to make a certainty statement about this gap. And we use the certainty element because this has multiple attributes that allow us to say what sort of uncertainty we have. So the certainty element takes the cert equals low attribute rather than putting it on the gap. And in addition, we say locus. So what part of the gap element are we expressing uncertainty about? Well, it's its name. And by expressing uncertainty about its name means I'm not sure if I should have tagged a gap here at all or not. Okay, so translating this into English, what we're saying is I want to flag that there is a line lost here, but it may be that there is not a line lost here. Okay, in other words, the stone breaks, but maybe there was no text after the break after all. Maybe that's just where it stopped. We can say slightly different things about the locus. We can say different kinds of things we're uncertain about gaps. We could say, the location of the gap is what we're uncertain about, or whatever. But one more example, last example. If instead of saying this may or may not be there may or may not be a line lost here, we can instead say there is a line lost here, but it may be because the stone is broken and it was missing, or it may be because the editor forgot or omitted to tag it at all. Okay, so it's therefore saying that the kind gap is uncertain, and so the certainty element here says certainty cert equals low, so I'm uncertain, and the locus is no longer the name of the gap, because instead it's matching the default value of match, where you have no match element attribute matched to a certainty element, is that it's the parent of the certainty element. So the gap, because the certainty is inside the gap. In this case, it's matching not the parent, but it's matching the reason attribute. That at symbol there means attribute of the gap. So it's saying it's that reason equals lost that I'm uncertain about. And what we're uncertain, the part of that attribute that we're uncertain about is its value, locus equals value. So we've said gap reason lost, but maybe it's gaps equal reason equals something else. Okay, and there are various other values of reason for gap, as you will have seen if you've attempted to tag it in an XML editor. You'll seen illegible, omitted, a couple of other values are possible in there. You can also, if you want to indicate on this certainty element, the other possible values of reason that that you're offering as alternatives to lost. So in this case, you can say asserted value is omitted. I've said this is a gap reason lost. I've said that the text breaks here and that what was written after has now been lost. But it may be that what was written, that what should have been written after was never written, was omitted in error by an ancient scribe. So as I've said, 99% of the time, what you want to say is one of the first two kinds of examples. Okay, this kind of example using certainty is so uncommon, it's barely worth worrying about. The most complex kind you're going to come across is this, where you simply say, you know, I've got a question mark on this gap, and I just want to say that it may or may not be a gap. So I think that's it. Anything to add, Irene?
No, I think that's all. Thank you, Gabby.
Okay, thank you.